Are you trying to figure out all the components that go into a commander deck? Well, we have a great episode for you today. Welcome to MTG Tuesdays Tips and Tricks. And we're on part 4 of how to play commander. And today is very important. So we've talked about choosing your commander color, but we're going to talk a little bit more today. Not in full depth, but this is an overview of what do you put in your commander deck, because that's important. So you got your commander, you got your general, the guy that's leading everything and doing all that. But the question is now is, okay, so now what? What do I need to put in here? How do I build this deck? The advantage of buying a pre-constructed deck when you get into commander is they've got all that stuff in there for you. You won't have to worry about it. But we're going to break it down, things that are important, things that have. Now, depending on what colors you're playing, some things may be different and things like that. But overview, the most important thing outside of your commander is lands. You need lands, and at the beginning, when you're first getting into commander, unless you have a large budget to spend, you're probably going to have a lot of the cheaper basic lands, tapped lands, things like that. But as you trade and grow and things like that, you can get more expensive lands, you can get dual lands, those are very, very expensive. You can get like shock lands and fetch lands and all these things. We're not going to worry about that. How many lands do you need in a deck? Between 32 and 40, depending on the type of deck, typically between 34 and 36 is a very good median. Again, depending on what your deck does. And you can get away with running a few more decks because there are cards out there that are now modal cards. So one side is a land, and there's a lot of those out there, and the other side is a spell. So you could run, let's say you want to run 36 lands in your deck, but let's say you run 2 of those modal cards. So like Sink into Stupor is one of them. You could then take one land card out, replace it with that card. Lands are important, and here's the thing. Unless you're playing super high, like competitive, CDH, high power, you need to have that those amount of lands, because if not, you're going to get in the game and also not be able to cast your spells and stuff like that. So lands are very, very important. You want different types of lands that do different things. So mostly you want lands that go with your commander's color identity. So if your commander is blue and green, you want to make sure you have lands that produce, and can only produce blue and green. But you also want to make sure you balance that out, and how to figure it out, we'll talk about it. But basically, you want to make sure that if you've got like more green cards, you have more lands that produce green, or for just basic forest in the deck over blue cards. But if you've got a good balance, you can kind of even it out and do the math. We'll talk about it at some point in the near future about figuring out how many lands specifically, how to figure out the different things. But land is the first thing. The next thing you want to look at is, okay, what does my commander do? What do I do? So I'm going to take Ren and Siri, for example. Ren and Siri is one of the early commanders I built. Ren and Siri wants cats and dogs to be cast. It is in Naya color, so it's red, white, green. So I need to get mana to get out there. So the next thing, when I'm building a deck, this is how I go through when I'm building a deck. I kind of begin looking, what does my deck do? And what do I need to do it? So the most important thing we talked about is lands. Well, you've got to get those lands and have mana to be able to play spells, correct? So you want ramp in your deck. Ramp is ways to be able to cast spells quicker. So ramp includes anything with spells that let you go get lands. Sometimes there are actually lands that let you get extra lands. So instead of getting one land, you get 2 lands with the lands. Myriad Landscape being one of those. And then you also have spells that just say, go get a forest, go get a plains, go get a whatever. Now, granted, if you're in green, those are much more abundant than other colors. If you have green in your deck, you're going to run a bunch of those spells. But then we also have what we call mana rocks. So mana rocks are things that tap for mana. Arcane Signet, Soul Ring. There's a bunch of different ones out there. I'm fiddling trying to find one so I can kind of show you what I'm talking about so you can see. But yeah, we're going to need that in there. So okay, here is a decent one here. Relic of Legends. Relic of Legends is going to tap for mana of any color, and then you can tap a legendary and tap it. So these are things that you want in your deck that are going to help you produce more mana. And when you first start out, it's maybe not as easy to get them, but there's a lot of 2 mana. So Felwar Stones, there's a bunch of talismans that are 2 mana. There's some that depending on what type of player you are, what kind of money you want to spend and things like that, there's lots of different things out there. But you don't need the 0 mana drop and the super low cost artifacts to do well. You can play a bunch of them, but when you're in colors where there's no green, you're going to need to run more artifacts, because we talk more about it in a different time about specifically breaking down exactly numbers and things like that in a deck, but you need that. The next thing is because you got to get spells. So now we're looking at our commander. What does our commander do? What does our commander want to do? So back to Ren and Siri. As the example, Ren and Siri want me to cast cats and dogs. So what creatures type am I going to get? Ones that allow me to cast that are cats and dogs, or do things to protect cats and dogs. But for the most part, most of it's going to be cats and dogs, because when I cast a cat, I get a dog. And when I cast a dog, I get a cat. Or when they enter the battlefield, sorry, I believe that's what it was. I don't believe it's a cast trigger. I always forget that. I get confused. Can't remember if it's cast or enter. But I want to follow the theme of my commander. If your commander is all about artifacts, you probably want to run more artifacts and maybe more artifact creatures and things like that. How many creatures you run is depending on the deck. Some decks want a lot of creatures. Some decks, you don't need as many creatures because that's just not what your deck is doing. So you want to figure out what your commander does and then go around it. You need artifacts, you need protection, spells, so things to protect your commander, things that either give it hexproof. There are several artifacts out there like Swiftfoot Boots, Lightning Greaves are the two best ones. Swiftfoot Boots is better if you have spells you're wanting to target your commander with to like make him bigger and pump him up. Lightning Greaves is good because it has a 0 equip cost. So these are all details. There's also spells out there that, so if you're in white, you want to, if you can afford it, get Teferi's Protection. It protects all your stuff. Green, Heroic Intervention makes all your stuff hexproof and indestructible for a turn. So there's ways you want to protect your stuff. So you go from getting your creatures in there to now looking at protection. How can I protect? And you want a couple of those. You don't need to go overboard with them. A few in each deck will help you. You also want to run interaction. Interaction to me is the most important part of Magic the Gathering. When you're playing against other people, you want a good amount of interaction. When I say interaction, I mean things that will remove or stop things on people's boards. So if you're in blue, that includes bounce spells and counter spells, and then like destroy target creature or whatever. Every color has destroy spells, but mono black or black does it the best. Typically, there's not a lot of downside to the black removal spells. White has really good ones. Blue mostly is you run more counter spells, so you counter the spell, you stop it from entering. That's your interaction. After that, though, you then have other interactions. So you want ways to remove like creatures, enchantments, non-land permanents, even lands. You want at least, in most decks, you want at least one source that can destroy a land. You typically also want in a deck some source, and it's harder in certain decks to do this, but at least something that can help you exile a graveyard or remove cards from a graveyard, because inevitably you're going to be playing against decks that want to bring back stuff from the graveyard and you have nothing to stop it. They're just going to go crazy. You build your deck, and then you always are going to be fine-tuning it. So on top of all that, you've got creatures. You want your creatures to run on the theme. You want your artifacts and your ramp. You need card draw. Outside of interaction, so removal spells, counter spells, you also need card draw. And I believe card draw is one of the most important things to make sure you have in the deck and you have enough of it. Because if every turn you draw one card, unless someone's playing something where you can't draw cards, but you need to be drawing more cards throughout the game, because if not, you're eventually going to run out of stuff and just going to be grabbing off the top. We call that top decking. If you're top decking, it's a lot harder to win. It's a lot harder to make that next step. So the recommendation is to run spells that let you draw cards, so that when you draw the cards, they can be like, okay, I'm drawing extra cards, I can do that and other things. Every color has different ways of drawing cards, whether it's by sacrificing creatures, by you draw a card, you discard a card. There's things like that allow you to do that. And so these are all important things to keep in mind when you're building commander deck overall. And then as you play it, you fine tune it. You add things and go, I got too much of this, I need some more card draw, I need this or that, I need some more ways of producing mana. You can always take things in and out. Oh, I've got too many creatures. And also got creatures, and there are what we call mana dorks, things that and included in your ramp are ways that allow you to tap. And then you probably in every deck want some form of 1 or 2 board wipes. 2 is probably the tops, unless you're running some kind of board wipe tribal that you really want to do that. 1 to 2. Every color has their version. White has the best. Mono black has some good ones as well. Blue typically is a mass bounce everything. That's their board wipe. They bounce everything. For the most part. So that is, you want at least 1, maybe 2. 2 is like the tops I would run in a deck, realistically, because if you run more than that, then you're just going to kind of slow the game down. And years ago, I'd tell you to run 3 to 5, but honestly, 1 to 2 is good enough. And then do more targeted removal, because honestly, sometimes you don't need to wipe the whole board because you take out your stuff, but you need to be able to get rid of the threat. So run more removal and stuff along those lines. Overall, your deck needs to have your lands, you need to have your ramp, you need to have the creatures in the theme of what you're running, you need to have card draw, you need to have removal, ways to get rid of targeted removal, and you need to have 1 or 2 board wipes. And then you want to make sure you've kind of in your deck, well, how am I winning this game? What is my way to win? So Ren and Siri, my goal is to get a bunch of cats and dogs out and then swing with them and pump them up. That is basically the whole goal of the deck, is to get a bunch of cats and dogs and use them to swing out, go wide, maybe your way you win is by drawing enough cards to let you win the game by drawing enough cards and having enough cards in your hand. Maybe your commander wants you to cast a bunch of instants and sorceries, and it doubles them or copies them, things like that. You want to figure out what your win con is, how to win, and make sure that's in your deck as well, because you don't just want to play there and keep going forever and never have a win con, so to say. Figure out what your deck does, and then you always want to fine tune it, make it better, add things to it, do stuff like that. But that overall is when we're playing Commander, what to put in the deck. There's a lot of other things, and we can fine tune it, but realistically, those are all in my opinion, the most important things to run in there. Make sure as your deck grows, if you have tokens and things like that, make sure you put those tokens either in with the deck box, or you have a whole like token sleeve thing that you can just get different tokens out. Because the worst thing in the world is, I'm the worst at it, is I'll have a deck and I forgot to put tokens in it, and then I'm like running around trying to find a token that I need. So that is all. Again, when you're building your own deck, it's a lot harder. When you take a pre-constructed deck, a lot of times you can take it, see what's in there, maybe add a few things. Sometimes you need to add a little more draw, sometimes you need to add a little more ramp, or one or two more creatures. But overall, that's what you put in your commander decks. And then as you play them, you can fine tune them, and guess what? Every couple of months, there's new sets coming out, which means there are new cards you can add to your deck. Maybe there's a better card. Maybe there's a card that does more stuff, and you're like, oh, this is a better card than this creature. Or there's better ramp, things like that. And as your budget improves too, when I first started out, I was a very, very budget player. So I was running cheap things. And as I've opened more and more packs, traded more and more stuff, I was able to get my hands on most of the good cards that I need to build decks all the way up to CDH level. And as you get there, you can do that. If you want to jump in right off into the deep end and have the money to go and spend a ton of money on all that stuff, you can. I just recommend people to go slowly. As you build your collection, have fun with it, get the cards you need, talk to people, let them look at your decks. I would love to help you. If you have a deck you're trying to build or have questions about it, feel free to send me a message. I would love to overlook the deck, try to give you some tips, advice on the deck. I have some ways, if you've been building custom decks for people, if they are interested in that, let me know. But I want to thank you guys so much for being here. We were talking about how to play Commander. We'll continue the series, adding some more depth into it. We want to make you better Commander players. So as you build your decks, and we'll eventually talk more and more in depth about exactly like numbers of things you should have in a deck minimum and stuff like that. I want to thank you guys so much for being here. And as always, we'll see you next time.